It is InfoWars Nightly News, the second segment tonight on this Wednesday, October 12th, 2011 transmission. Yesterday on the radio, I was joined by Lord Christopher Monckton, inventor, researcher, journalist, top advisor to Margaret Thatcher, to discuss the incredible developments with the power grab going on in the Eurozone and the fact that former British Prime Minister John Major, the architect of the treaty that brought the UK in to that monstrosity without a vote, came out and basically decried it and said it was time for England to get out of it. And we'll talk to him a little bit about that at the end of the interview. But the main reason he's here to join us tonight is to break down the latest developments on what really is the #1 issue facing free humanity. That is the collectivists that are a fascist group that have repackaged tyranny in a velvet glove of environmental guilt tripping. They've been proven to be abject frauds, but they don't care. They move forward, and the front line battleground is Australia. Now, here in the U.S., they couldn't pass carbon taxes against select corporations, so Obama just did it through the EPA jackboots. But that's being fought back. But in Australia, they already put in carbon taxes a few years ago with devastating effect, taking land off use, taxes on cattle and sheep farmers. It's really enraged the Aussies. I've seen polls of 70 to 90% in that range. And you've seen governments come and go who support it. But just like with Cameron, continuing what Tony Blair and others did in the UK, it's the same story in Australia. Just like Mitt Romney supports the carbon tax and is the Republican frontrunner. There's no way to get rid of these people. They just keep coming back and back and back because it's a total global power grab tax scheme. And protesters did disrupt the question time after carbon bill passed the lower house. James Dillingpole, writing for The Telegraph in England, had the headline, "Australia Commits Suicide." We talked to him on the radio today, so I thought we'd get Lord Monckton on about this and see if he agrees with Dillingpole's statement that it's Australia committing national suicide. And then I want to get to all the other developments with these people because they're losing battles, but they don't stop. This is like a zombie army wanting to seize power. Lord Monckton, thank you for coming on with us today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be back, Alex, and so soon after yesterday. And of course, I quite understand this is an important moment where yet again an extreme leftist, effectively a Marxist or fascist government, they're the same, whichever side of the coin you look, has rammed through the carbon tax it had long been talking about. And it did so by buying off a couple of the independents who might otherwise have stood out and done the right thing and would have become instant national heroes if they had. But they're set up for life financially now, so they don't care. It's a very shabby deal that's been done. And I expected this to happen, to be honest. I thought that they would get it through, and I think they'll get it through the Senate as well. This will become law. But Tony Abbott, the leader of the opposition, has finally found his voice. He had been just a little bit too quiet on this issue. And then finally, he has decided to speak out and say, whatever it takes, and this is a blood oath, he's put it that way, he is going to overturn this carbon tax, even if they do get it through both houses. So this is going to be, if you like, a temporary suicide, and the patient will be revived as soon as this ghastly government that they've got now is thrown out. So I think there are, in fact, signs of hope in all this, because what has happened in Australia is there has been a real debate.
By the way, I should interrupt you here.
Skeptics have won that debate, and the Australian government is now already a lame duck government. It can shove all the things through that it wants while it's still got the majority. In a couple of years, it is going to go down, and really everybody knows this now, including itself. It's going to go down to a historic defeat, and all the bad measures it's taken, of which this is far and away the worst, will simply be undone by the incoming Liberal National Coalition.
And Lord Monckton, just to interrupt, I should have prefaced in the introduction, you have had multiple trips to Australia. I know you have canvassed the country, speaking to crowds years ago of a few hundred. I've read thousands and thousands now everywhere you went, and that was evidenced. Your blitz through the countryside and cities was evidenced by the polls completely flipping. and the people recognizing the horror of warrantless home inspections, all of it. So I should have prefaced that you're a true expert on this Australian issue, because can you tell us how much time you've spent there and what you saw?
Well, yes, I first was asked to go there in January, February of last year. And I went at the request of two retired engineers from Noosa, patriots, both of them, Kay Smith and John Smead, and they were absolutely determined that the other side of the case on the carbon tax should be fairly and squarely put by somebody who could command the headlines. And because the left like to attack me because I'm a peer and I'm an aristocrat and chinless wonder, if you like, I get publicity not because I seek it, but because they can't resist trying to tear me apart in public. And people watch this, and they therefore hear that there is another side of the message. So I went right round Australia, and you're quite right, thousands did turn out, to the absolute horror and bafflement of the political class and the media there, who had done their best to give it no coverage at all. And the second time I went out was just a couple of months ago. Again, going round Australia, again, huge crowds turning out everywhere. And that time they really organised a massive campaign to try to stop them letting me into the country, to try to have me banned at every venue I spoke at. They really tried to interfere. They sicked their so-called comedy team onto me from the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. They did all kinds of childish tricks. They rang me up at 6 in the morning and said, "Are you a member of the House of Lords?" I said, "Yes, but without the right to sit or vote." Then they got onto the House of Lords and said, "No, he hasn't got the right to sit or vote, therefore he isn't a member of the House of Lords, and we're going to write and tell him so." Huge kind of campaigns of personal vilification went on. But what was interesting was the reaction of the ordinary people who came to the meetings. They really wanted to hear the scientific and economic truth without any nonsense, and that's what I gave them. And in the end, for the first time ever, the National Press Club in Canberra decided to agree to allow a climate skeptic to give the other side of the argument. They'd never done this before. But finally they decided that they couldn't any longer refuse the other side their say. And so even though it was in the format of a debate, in which I was allowed to debate with somebody from the other side, nevertheless, for an hour on national television, rebroadcast 3 times, I was able to put across, in an organised fashion, the arguments for why there isn't a problem with the climate and why, even if there is, it would cost 10 times more to try to do anything about it than to pay for the relatively small amounts of damage that might arise if we don't. And that message went right around Australia, and they did some polling in both my trips. After my first trip, they found that in the month that I was there, opinion swung 10 percentage points away from belief in global warming and towards a more healthily sceptical point of view. And that, they said, was a record. But this time, the same thing happened in 1 hour when the polling organisation Roy Morgan did a minute-by-minute tracking poll of 350 balanced selected audience who had buttons they could press to say who was winning. And at the end of that hour, I had shifted 9% of that audience in just 1 hour. And they said that that, to their knowledge, was unprecedented in the history of polling. They said never had so many people changed their minds so quickly. Now, why was this? It was because the media there had done their level best for years not to give the other side of the story. And when eventually the National Press Club decided it simply had to do this, for the first time, and I mean for the first time, many citizens of Australia who had never heard that even there was a serious argument against all this nonsense, finally heard it for the first time. The scales fell from their eyes, and they realized they had been misled. So
simply amazing. Simply amazing, Lord Monckton. Look, Mark Tursick, the former Goldman Sachs operative, managing director, the head of the Nature Conservancy, he was in town here last week, and they're the ones that will swap your government debt for your lands and carbon footprints. And our guys got an interview after his speech. He agreed to it, but when they came up and said, what about Obama's pledge to, quote, bankrupt the coal companies that supply half our power, he suddenly freaked out and said, I'm not going to talk to you, and ran off. And that's what I'm seeing everywhere. Al Gore won't debate you after many years of challenging. We have James Cameron. The director starts challenging people, then backs out. because it's so childish that they want to ignore all the real environmental issues, but instead guilt us all into paying them some type of carbon tax, in many cases to individual groups. But I've seen this same thing. They won't debate me on radio when they've set me up as a guest. As soon as I start bringing up facts, they say, that's it, I'm not doing this. So it was this attempted hoax, just to point out how far we've come, that no one could ever debate this. There's no scientists that don't agree with us. And it turns out it was all manufactured rubbish. I mean, is this a death blow? Because you would think it would be. Now they run in abject fear, and they've got the big mega money behind it, but they're still just force it through. And now we see their cheerleaders all over U.S., British news saying authoritarianism is good when it's for the earth. I mean, don't we just need to get down to calling them what they are? They don't think they're helping the earth. I've run into these people too much. They are cold-blooded. And when you show them you know the game, they're like vampires at high noon. They run.
Oh, they run a mile. There's no doubt about it. They are running very, very scared indeed. They've seen what's happened to the Gillard government in Australia. It's made itself one of the most unpopular governments in the history of democracy because it has pushed this issue beyond all reason or sense, because otherwise it can't cling to coalition with the Greens who hold the balance of power. They've sold their soul for the sake of short-term power. They will be out of office certainly for a long time from the next election, and possibly forever. And other people watching around the world have seen the utter abject collapse of the Australian Labour Party in the polls, the hatred of it, which is now evident throughout Australia. And they've realised that if they try to do this anywhere else, they're going to get the same reaction. So their tactic has changed. Of course, they'll continue not to debate, because the more this is debated, the more people wake up and realise there's another side to the story. The last thing they want is that. What they will do is they'll pick off industries one by one, starting with coal. This is happening in Canada, for instance, as we speak. The government had said very firmly it wasn't going to introduce a carbon tax, and then moments later along comes Environment Canada, another of these lobbying groups which in fact operates under the guise of a government department, and it said we're going to shut down the coal industry in Canada, and here are the regulations by which we're going to do it, and they got the backing of the Canadian government for this. Now, so far these regulations haven't gone through the House, but I've been asked to do some costings on it, and I've had a look at it. And it would be 10 times more expensive, in fact 18 times more expensive, to introduce regulations of this kind worldwide, like the Canadian ones, than it would be to sit back and just pay the cost of any climate-related damage, even if the global warming was as much as they said it was going to be, and even if it was going to cause as much damage as they said it would, neither of which things is in the least bit likely to be true. So the fact is that on the arguments, these people are finished, they're on the ropes, they're holding endless inquiries into why it is that their public relations campaign has been so unsuccessful. The one thing they will not admit is the reason they've failed is that they are not telling the truth, and everybody can see that.
Well, Lord Monckton, that was my next point. I saw in the BBC yesterday, the headline that top, global warming spokesman says the problem is scientists aren't articulate, and the global warming climate change group is just too scientific and doesn't have spokespeople. They've spent tens of millions. They've got all the slickest PR, Hollywood behind them. I mean, that's another grand hoax, that they're the little David and we're the big wicked Monckton, Goliath coming at them, when it's the opposite. I mean, it's been ragtag people for 20 years being demonized with calls for your arrest, calls for my arrest. We're kooks, we're scum, we're liars, we're dangerous, we're Nazis, and professors being run out and sued, and just every form of persecution for our heresy. With all their slick PR, the truth is trumping them, and the dragon is writhing, claiming that we're big, mean bullies. I mean, is there no end to the unmitigated hubris that these clowns exude?